The first month of the NFL season is over. Where do the Cowboys stack up compared to the rest of the NFL? We will break it down on this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Elena McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. We are recapping the first month of the NFL season. It's October. It's hard to believe we're already here. But, Lena, let's talk about what has been the biggest surprise for the Cowboys through these first four games. What stood out to you the most?
You know, I think the first thing we have to point out is that the thing that's been disappointing about the early part of the Cowboys season is probably what has not been surprising, right? Like the stuff that we had anticipated being a problem and anticipated being something to hold this team back, especially early in the season. Like a lot of those things have come to fruition, right? So it's a lot of the kind of negative vibes are familiar, but I think that also some of the negative vibes are being created because the other negative vibes are familiar, right? It's like, oh, not again, right? So I do think the thing that's been the biggest surprise to me so far, or at least was, these first few weeks, was really how long it kind of took the Cowboys to get Dak and CeeDee Lamb going. I think that a lot of the other stuff that has been problematic for the Cowboys, an inability to stop the run, kind of some disjointed aspects of the offensive line that has two young players on it. Some of the other stuff has just been a little bit predictable, but I think that the considering how long Dak and CD have played together, I understand that they didn't have training camp and all that, but it just felt like it took a little bit, maybe a week or two longer than I expected for them to really start to kind of get into a rhythm to the point where they were the dominant part of the offense or the engine of the offense again. So, that was one area where I felt like the Cowboys were going to be able to go into the season and feel pretty solid early on and have it be something that they could lean on while the rest of the kind of known problems sort of worked themselves out at the early part of the season. But that didn't necessarily prove out to be the case early on.
And I agree with you. I just maybe I falsely assumed that everything would look exactly the way that it did post bye week last year, where CeeDee Lamb is getting 13, 14 targets. He's the engine of the offense. They're going to move them all around. And it's just going to be, can everybody else fit into this offense? To me, it feels like we're right back to where we were at this time last year, where CeeDee's been productive. Make no mistake about that. It's not like he hasn't had some good games. He had a good game last week against the Giants.
Yeah.
But it still doesn't feel quite like it did in October and November last year, where they were hitting on all cylinders. And maybe it's just because they didn't have any training camp practices together. But even then, I'm surprised that it's taken this long.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing is that, look, I mean, CD and Dak worked together a lot, obviously, throughout the offseason. And just that's, I think, I mean, I guess we're pointing to this as the impact. I think that's just surprising how much of an impact it had on their kind of early chemistry. And that's really what it seemed to be, because you saw it's not like they weren't targeting CeeDee Lamb early in these games or trying to get him looks. It felt like the timing between the two players were off, that the ball was coming, slants was coming in behind CD, or CD was running the route in a way that Dak wasn't expecting. So I think that it's definitely trending in the right direction. And obviously the Giants game was definitely a big step in the correct direction. But it was surprising to see that it took, a little bit longer than I think we all anticipated for them to kind of get onto the course that they needed to be in order to produce the way that we need them to produce in this offense.
Now, this is a little bit of a sidebar here, but did you hear Mike McCarthy's answer yesterday when I believe it was Clarence Hill asked him about the lack of motion? First of all, if you can kind of recap what he said, that would be great. But what was your thoughts on his answer?
Yeah, essentially, basically what he said is that, a lot of the numbers are being skewed. And look, this is a legitimate criticism. We could talk about the other aspect, but a lot of the numbers are being skewed by the two facts. One that he didn't mention. One is the lack of sample size. And I can't believe that more people aren't talking about the fact that 4 games is not exactly a huge sample size for this stuff. There's just a lot of circumstances that can happen. And in the Cowboys case, the circumstance is that they have been way behind in some of these games. And so they've been in heavy pass 2-minute offenses where they've had to hurry up and speed things up. And what does that mean? That means that there's just not time for motions. There's just not time for shifts because you're having to run these kind of the quick offenses, get to the line. You just don't have time to kind of do that pre-snap stuff. And then I think he also mentioned some of the other stuff that we have talked about is that you've got young players and adding in a lot of that stuff can add to some of the pre-snap penalties. And this is a team that even without all that motion and everything is struggling with pre-snap penalties. So I do think that McCarthy has a point to a degree in the sense that we are making judgments on small sample sizes. That's not discounting that this could be a problem. I just think that the numbers, pointing towards it certainly can be manipulated. And look, it may sound like an excuse, but McCarthy's not wrong. Like you go back and watch all the snaps for this team through 4 games. An abnormal large of them are coming in no huddle in 2-minute situations.
Well, just to speak on the sample size, I was reading a thing by Ben Baldwin today, and it was how aggressive are you on 4th down? And his filter was when the game is non-4th quarter, so basically 1st, 2nd, 3rd quarter, and the winning percentage is your win probability is between 10 and 90%. The Cowboys didn't have a single play in there. So they were the only team not on the chart because they just didn't have a play that qualifies, which kind of shows you like it's been a wonky 4 games where I don't want to say you throw it all out, but you understand a little bit what McCarthy's saying. Like when you're in no huddle in 2 minutes, you don't have time to use motion because you got to be quick on all this stuff.
I'm going to be speaking as a consumer of Cowboys content to other consumers of Cowboys content here, please. Analytics are an incredible tool, right? They help kind of dissect the game in a way that is important and different, and it's helping the NFL kind of learn their own game in a new way.
Don't tell that to Troy Aikman. I can tell when he says analytics, there's just so much anger.
There's so much just angst. I think it's important that we as consumers understand what we're consuming. Like, I think the context of what the analytics are measuring need to be drilled down on. I think there's too many times when we see these numbers, these stats that are created, and folks don't know what they're quoting. Like they don't know what is actually being measured, and they may be conveying the wrong information because of that. So I think that I would just caution in general about using season-wide stats through 4 games. Like it's just I understand everyone's excited to use their tools and their stats and everything. It's just a small sample size. Now, again, that's not to discount what the overall point is. The Cowboys probably need to use more shifts and more motion.
Yes, absolutely.
But let's wait until we get more of a sample size to see exactly how much of a real problem it is versus looking at these numbers without kind of any context and assuming that the Cowboys are at, bottom in the league in motion usage.
I'm going to be concerned if we don't see the pre-snap motion and that stuff go up as the season goes along, right? Like if it stays the same or it starts to decline, I don't know how it could decline anymore. That's when I'll be concerned. I also want to say one of the most surprising things quickly before we have to move on is the lack of big plays in this Cowboys offense. Yeah. They've had the second fewest big plays in the NFL. They've had the fewest 10-yard runs in the NFL, only 4. That's not super surprising considering they don't have a quarterback that runs and takes off like a Justin Fields, who the Cowboys play this week. Mm-hmm. They're also starting 2 rookie offensive linemen, and they've been down so much, but the lack of the big plays in the passing game is a little concerning.
Yeah, I mean, again, like the context is important there too. You just mentioned those things, and the fact that they're behind means that defenses are playing more shell coverage because they have to produce big plays when you're behind in order to kind of keep up with the pace of scoring. So it makes creating big plays even more difficult than normal. It's so much easier to create big plays when you're in a neutral game script than when you are in a negative game script. right? So just because teams have to account for the run, in order to account for the run, they have to play more players in the box. That's fewer players down the field. So that's why it makes it easier to attack down the field. And I think that the opposite is true too. Once you attack down the field, teams start playing more shell coverage. They pull one of those guys out of the box. Now it's easier to have 10-yard runs as well. So I also think the real issue here for me, like the real kind of area where I feel like they are severely lacking in big plays, is in the run game, right? That's the lack of 10-yard runs is concerning. I will say that I do think that those are coming. I think you saw a little bit more of that last week. And they had a couple of penalties. They had a couple of bigger runs, 10-yard runs called back last year because of some holding calls. I think they get some of that stuff cleaned up, and I think that they are starting to run the ball better. Just because, like, if you look at the way that the Cowboys offensive line was displacing the Giants defensive line during the game, that is where the big step I felt like has come. I'm looking for hopefully more of that against a much more difficult defensive line than the Giants had. Not to poo-poo what the Giants have, but the Steelers defensive line is one of the best in the NFL.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about the most disappointing unit through the first month of the NFL season. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. It is so easy. I actually just keep FanDuel up when I'm watching these games because it gives you a good indication of where they believe this game is going. You can look at what the drive results, the odds are for that. There's so many cool bets that you can make in game. Telling you, last night was so much fun with 2 Monday Night Football games, monitoring both of those games. Absolutely fantastic. Right now on FanDuel, get this, you can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. You don't have to win or lose your bet. Just when you place your bet, you're going to get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. $200 that you could use on the Cowboys, plus 2.5 against the Steelers this weekend. Hopefully, we'll see. Go visit FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. That is FanDuel.com. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. Later, let's talk about the most disappointing unit through the first month of the season. What do you got?
It's hard not to like think about on the defensive side of the ball, just because that seems like that's been by the more disappointing side of the ball. Yep. I think we anticipated the offense would kind of struggle and kind of take a little while to get going. I mean, despite what we just said about CeeDee Lamb's, I thought CeeDee Lamb would be the aspect that would work. I thought it was the rest of the offense that would kind of struggle. I think the thing that's really been disappointing to me is the way the defensive line is played. I understand that we had pretty low expectations for the interior of the defensive line and how they would play the run, but I gotta say, like, even with that in mind, they played kind of in a disappointing way, especially in the first 3 weeks. Even when they got opportunities to rush the passer, it didn't feel like they were bringing guys down at the rate that they needed to. Look, were they still a great unit while Mike and Lawrence out there? Yeah, absolutely. They were still harassing the quarterback, but they weren't earning the opportunity to rush the passer enough. They know that that's part of their issue. And look, I mean, you clearly can't just rush the passer all the time, and you have to earn that ability to kind of get those third downs, to kind of pin back your ears and go after the quarterback. And I think that at times Parson and D-Law have played good defense against the run, but I think there was also times when they were also part of the issue in stopping the run. So I think the interior defensive line has started to take steps in the positive direction, and that's a good thing to see. I'm glad that started to kind of happen, but I think even with a low bar of expectation with this defense, especially the interior defensive line, I still think that they disappointed us early in the season. And then now you add injury to insult, and it feels like, this is a unit that has got a lot of work to do to kind of turn things around for this team. And I think that, their improvement will go a long way in kind of improving the team overall.
Yeah, I remember when the Deron Bland injury news hit, you felt like, oh, that's a huge injury, but at least they have this pass rush that's going to help them win these
Yeah.
games early on. They've been so bad against the run, the McMosier line, McCool line, whatever you want to call it. I don't know. We got to come up with a more creative
Mhm.
name that they're not even getting the right to rush the passer.
Yep.
That's pretty terrible. I'm also going to add in the safeties because this was a spot, at least you and I thought for a long
Yeah.
time now, that they've been really good at safety. They've had two quality starters in Malik Wilson and Malik Hooker and Donovan Wilson. We thought that they had good backups in Wanye Thomas and Izzy Makamu and Marquise Bell. That unit just has underperformed so far, Layden. If you look at PFF grades, and I know they're not gospel, but Malik Hooker, 65th out of 77 qualifying safeties. Donovan Wilson, 50 out of 77 qualifying safeties. Like, those are two below average safeties right now. And I think the thing that's most concerning is there have been times where they look slow out there. And the last thing you want is your safeties to look slow, and they have.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that's really kind of disappointing about that situation so far is how little we've seen of Wanye Thomas and of Bell. I mean, Bell's injured, I think, currently. He may, or he's
How many
dealing with
snaps
an
do you think
ankle.
Wanye has played without looking on
On
defense?
defense, maybe 15, 20.
12. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's not enough, especially consider what you just mentioned. And I think that we were expecting more of a safety rotation, right? Because obviously what we talked about, the excitement around Thomas.
Mhm.
Obviously, Marquise Bell had a really spectacular year at linebacker, and we were excited to see kind of what he would do going back to safety, and he had a good training camp. And I just don't know that we've seen, despite kind of very up and down play from Hooker and from Wilson. I feel like we would have seen more of a rotation there. And again, like you mentioned Izzy Mukwamu, and it's a very similar situation. Like, I don't understand why Izzy Mukwamu isn't playing more football.
So
Like,
between Kamu, Marquise Bell, and Wanye Thomas, they've played 42 combined defensive snaps this year, and almost all of them came in week one once that game got out of hand.
yeah, see, like again, like it's not that I feel like they should be the starters, but
Nope.
those are a collection of three guys who I feel like can play good football, and for guys that are a little bit older to kind of give them some breathing room, just to get a chance to get off the field for a little while. I just kind of feel like that there should be more of a rotation there. And maybe there will be more as the season goes on. Maybe this is an issue where Zimmer needs to learn to trust some of these younger players a little bit better. But I mean, I feel like the time is now, because Thomas has shown you
Yeah.
the ability to make plays in this defense, and Bell too, just in a different position, right? They have earned opportunities, I feel like. And so, and I think that the safeties that are starting have earned the opportunity to kind of have a couple extra plays on the bench if they need to. So yeah, I do think that the safety play, I don't think it's the safety thing is a talent issue. I think it's a, we need these younger guys to get more
Well,
opportunities this year.
and I'm not suggesting they're playing worse than the defensive line, because they're not. I just had much higher standards and
Yeah, that's
expectations
fair.
for the safeties. I thought that would be a strength of your
Strength.
defense, and it hasn't been. They've been a problem in most of these games so far.
That's absolutely true. I would say that what we would have pointed out, that we probably thought that this was one of the strongest groups on the team, maybe one of the deepest safety groups in the NFL, and the guys at the top have not played up to the standard that we have expected, and they're not playing the younger guys, so we can't really find out exactly what we have in them. So I hope that kind of something works itself out there.
And the next couple weeks are going to be huge for them, because without Micah Parsons and DeMarcus
Mhm.
Lawrence, you're going to have to blitz more. And that means that you're going to have these safeties being coverage a lot more. They can't afford to give up big plays if the blitz doesn't get there. They need to start jumping routes, making tackles. That's the big thing for me. Like,
That's the really thing.
make tackles when you're supposed to make tackles. My goodness.
Yeah, and honestly, again, maybe another reason why you would want a guy like Thomas and Bell out there. Those are two exceptional tacklers who are
Yes.
special teams guys. They have to tackle all day. Not that the other guys don't too, but I mean, again, that's not one of the reasons that you wouldn't put a Thomas or a Bell out there. Those guys are experienced tacklers, solid players in that sense. Yeah,
Well, let me give you a perfect example. And
yeah,
I'm not picking on Donovan Wilson, because I think he's been better than Malik Hooker. But Last week against the Giants, there was a 4th and 1, and Donovan
Mhm.
Wilson came off the edge untouched, hit Devin Singletary in the backfield, which should have been a 3-yard loss. Singletary gets out of it, gets the first down, and the Giants score a field goal like
That's
a
right.
couple plays later. Like those are the plays when they're there, you have to make them. Don't let bad teams hang around. And the Cowboys did. They almost lost the game because of bad tackling like that.
Yeah, and honestly, that's the thing. Is kind of a nut in a nutshell of the Cowboys that made me feel better about this team is that it felt like in the Giants game, there were several times where the Cowboys made the play, they just didn't finish.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and they could have, this game could have been way, way worse than it was, or a blowout even. If the Cowboys had just kind of finished on a couple of their plays. I'm hoping that starts to happen a little bit more now. And if that does, I think you're going to start seeing improvement in these areas of safety and defensive line. But until then, we need to see a little bit more from both of those units.
All right, Lane, let's talk about where the Cowboys stack up in the NFC after 4 games. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. I absolutely love Gametime. It is the only ticketing app that I use when I want to go to live event, which is usually football games, although my wife likes to go to some comedy events near us. We use Gametime all the time. They have a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting your tickets for your live events even easier and faster than ever before. On Gametime Picks, it'll filter out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats so that you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. One of the things I like the most about Gametime is that you can get a panoramic view of your seats before you buy. When I go to football games, I usually like to sit in the end zone. It just gives me the best view. So I want to see exactly what my seats look like. Are the goalposts going to be in the way? Am I high up enough so I can see the whole field? This is where Gametime is absolutely phenomenal. Plus, they have the lowest price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, go check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day, one in the morning with Tyler Rowland, one in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. Find Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, Layden, we're through 4 games. The Cowboys are at 2-2. How do you feel like they stack up compared to the rest of the NFC right now?
Yeah, I think right now they're kind of, middle of the pack. I mean,
I agree.
I think they're probably, if the season were over today, they would be very much battling for a last playoff spot, right? Or worse. I think that it's still very early in the season, and I think this is right around the time when it feels like teams start kind of forming into who they actually are, right? So I think we're going to get more information about this team, and frankly, a lot of these other teams that are in the NFC in the next coming weeks. So, obviously they're not in the front runner category.
Nope.
And even right now, they're kind of taking a backseat in the division race to a Washington team that has started out hot. But I think that, this is where we kind of wanted to be, right? You wanted to get out of the first season, like you've said, like Bill Parcells and many people have said, we want to get out of that first month 2-2 as best as you can. And if you can do that, then you're still in the race. You still have a chance. You still kind of have an opportunity to sort of work out the kinks. Now the Cowboys come into this situation the next few weeks. It kind of a murderer's row a little bit. They got to play obviously Pittsburgh this week. They got to play Detroit. They're going to play Atlanta, who I understand is not quite living up to the billing, but could still it could be another team that could figure it out and start playing like a much better team. And then you've got a struggling, or at least struggling for them, 49ers team eventually. So you are in a little area right here where you have the opportunity to kind of really make some moves in the NFC and kind of gain some wins against potential wild card opponents that you might be having to measure up against later in the season. So this is going to be a real mile marker for the Cowboys. Unfortunately, they're missing some of their best players, but that's just life in the NFL. So right now, I would say, they're kind of in that above average area of the NFC, but with an opportunity to kind of really stake a claim here in these next few weeks if they can figure out a way to win one or maybe hopefully even both of those two big NFC games.
The good news is I think there's 7 other NFC teams that have a 2-2 record right now. You only have one undefeated team through 4 weeks. That's the Minnesota Vikings. Usually at this time, you'll have 2 or 3. With the Seahawks going down last night, that obviously cuts it down to 1. I mean, you're basically within a game of everybody in the conference, right? And it's not a terrible spot to be in, right? Like, we're going to get to the end of the year and you're going to see all these teams are going to be matched up close with one another. They're fine. What they need to do in October is find a way to go 2-2. And I know if I keep saying 2-2 every month, you're going to end up at 8-9 or 9-8, right? But you look at their schedule. This is what we've been saying all offseason. You get to Thanksgiving and the schedule really lightens up. Like, it just gets so much easier for this Cowboys team in a way that we're not really used to seeing. Like, their end of season schedule be easy. Their toughest part of the season starts right now. Pittsburgh, Detroit, San Francisco, Houston, Philly. Like, that is the meat of your schedule. You come out of there 3-2, you're going to be perfectly fine to accomplish all the goals that you want to accomplish.
Yeah, and again, it's obviously a really tough uphill battle. You're missing 2 of your best players on defense, on a defense that hasn't been playing exceptionally well these last few weeks. But look, all these angles are changing. It's a week-to-week league, and I think every week we are proving that. So I'm interested to see exactly how the Cowboys are able to kind of overcome what they have going, and hopefully they become a better team for it. And when they get their players back, that'll make this team even stronger. That they knew that they could get through that without having Micah Parsons or Lawrence or Bland for a good portion of it. So I'm interested to see if the offense can take the challenge. And really kind of step it up to kind of help their team out. That's Mike McCarthy talked about it yesterday, and I think a couple of the coaches mentioned it, is that this team really needs to play better complementary football, right? They need to help. The offense needs to do a better job of helping the defense when the defense is struggling. And that's where I think the offense is kind of still needs to take that step, right? Where it still feels like this was an offense before that, in 2023, it felt like you could, when you needed to, go on a long drive to kind of help your defense out, give it opportunities to take a rest. They are definitely going to need to find a way to do that over these next few games against these tough teams, because it's going to be tough. And if you leave your defense out there exposed against some of these teams for long periods of time, it doesn't matter how good they're going to play. Eventually, they're going to crack, and then they'll start giving up big points.
The last thing I want to say is I have to do these power rankings every week for the 33rd team. And like, you're right. Like, when I ask you where the Cowboys stack up, you say middle of the pack. And I don't disagree with you. Then you start to rank the teams, and it's like, okay, I'm not putting this team behind Dallas or ahead of Dallas, right? And all of a sudden, even as unimpressive as the Cowboys have looked, you're making a case for them as like the 11th or 12th best team in the NFL. That's just kind of where we're at right now, Landon. Like, I think teams from, 6 to 22 have never been closer together. And just depending on your week, the last week is where you're going to rank. It's wild how similar that group of teams are right now.
And again, like I keep harping on, I think as the weeks go on, the cream of the crop will rise, right?
Yes.
Like the teams will start to separate a little bit. But as we stand here, today is October 1st, right? We've just finished clear September football. The chaos of the early September schedule has started to die down.
Preseason's over.
And now we'll start to see kind of a little bit more of what we kind of all predicted in the preseason for these teams. We'll start to see the kind of the pure actual qualities of these teams start to show up and start to actually play with better football. And then they'll become a lot more this league will become a lot more recognizable in these next coming weeks than it has been in these last few.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. On tomorrow's show, we've got a special guest. It's Aisha Morrison. We're going to be answering your Twitter questions. So make sure that you send them into us at Marcus_Mosier, at McCoolBCB. Go check out the Locked On Cowboys podcast on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Again, Aisha will be on the show tomorrow. We've got a crossover Thursday coming with Locked On Steelers, Chris Carter. Make sure you check that one out. And Landon, you and I Friday getting ready for the biggest game of the season. Cowboys at Steelers. Can't wait. We'll see you guys right back here tomorrow.